Hello, thank you very much for joining us, Isis. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well today. How are you, Beth? Good to see you again.
I'm really good, thank you. And I would love if you could introduce yourself to the people watching us here today as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. So I am a diversity and inclusion expert, I think is the easiest way to describe it.
Mhm.
And I serve teams and organizations and people on the front lines on social media in getting comfortable and confident on all of the hot button topics, all of those sensitive issues surrounding identity that are just becoming more and more central in our cultural conversation today.
Yeah, that's so key because I think when we spoke, I'm coming at our conversation from the position of like a social media manager, someone who runs client accounts. And it is something that's tough, especially if your client doesn't share your same views. It's like, how do you manage this and make sure that you're guiding them to not maybe overstep or say something that's going to cause absolute outrage and potentially upset their business? And it's a really sticky situation, a really fine line. But there's also no one that really talks about this or has support around this that I see in the space. So it was interesting to dive in and really reconsider what that looks like.
Yeah, it's a topic that I think everyone's kind of winging it on, whether you're managing social media for a client or you are an individual brand or influencer. And you also often don't know when something's going to come up, because sometimes it's something in the news or it's something happening in your industry or someone that you like are adjacent to or have some kind of relationship with, and you're being asked to say something or do something about it. Other times, like you have inadvertently said something and don't even realize, right, until someone points out the language you used or says there's an issue with that or calls that problematic. And then the skill set around how do I even deconstruct what this call is, what this is, what is my stance on this? Like there's so many variables, and I see everyone kind of reinventing the wheel and trying things out and a lot of things going wrong. So that's why I'm trying to get out there as a resource across all of these topics too, because historically it's been, you have to talk to this person about this topic or that person about that topic. There isn't really any bringing it all together. And I have the privilege of, 7 years of research and 5 years of speaking and facilitating on these topics that give me that kind of confidence and competence across pretty much all of them.
Yeah. So I mean, just in case we're skipping a chapter for anyone who's watching, could you break down the kind of the concept of social change? Like, what do you mean when you say social change, and what impact will that have on people watching?
Yeah, I think social change is almost a weird thing to call it, because what's really happening is things are expanding. The culture is expanding to bring light and platform to groups that have historically been silenced and marginalized. I mean, think about pre-social media, right? You without the help of like a news outlet, you couldn't get any kind of platform, right? Never mind in the media, get a TV show or even podcast. Like back then it was completely different. And the same goes for holding people accountable for bad behavior and all of that. There was just such a limit to how you could publicize things. You look at people like R. Kelly, for instance, right? For how long it's so hard to get attention on these things. And so what's happening is this expansion that for a lot of more advantaged groups feels like things are changing, like expectations on them are changing. They're like, this word used to be okay and now it's not. It's like, no, it was never okay. You just didn't know that. And now there's enough people and a big enough conversation and a broad enough inclusion that you're being told over and over that word's not okay. And now it's changing. And so I understand and I empathize with the people for whom, this is not the work that they do. This is far from anything in their life. And they just feel like they're damned if they do, damned if they don't know how to engage, don't feel safe, feel scared. And that is a real fault of the broader diversity and inclusion industry or social justice warrior space on Twitter, whatever you want to call that.
And I also see that in the online space is where more of that quote unquote social change is happening, and where it seems to be happening quicker. So it's almost like small business owners, service providers, people who are like one-man bands on their own, trying to still figure out how to market themselves and how to be a business person, are also then faced with this sideline of needing to make sure that the way that they approach conversation and the way that they talk uses inclusionary language and like things that probably haven't even crossed their mind, because their focus is so much on need to grow my business, need to generate, and they're just oblivious, and not in a ignorant way where they're choosing to. It's a complete lack of understanding, and just that they hadn't been aware that these issues happened until they stepped into the online space themselves. And I find the whole proximity of it all absolutely fascinating, especially when I'm working with and dealing with like ex-corporates where they're like getting dragged by HR to take in some of this stuff, and now they're in an online space where it's steps and steps and steps ahead again. So I'm hoping that the people watching are going to be like, oh my God, I didn't know about any of this, and we can hop in and hopefully educate a little bit on the topic.
Yeah, bring them in, give them a warm embrace.
Yeah.
Okay, there's nothing wrong with you. You know, thank you for being here and trying to learn about this. Because what is important to understand, you know, you mentioned like it's not coming from a place of maliciousness or whatever. It's just like not, it's ignorance. And unfortunately, there is no online, there is no neutral, right? If you're saying my service is for men and women who blah, 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 that now looks like an intentional, there are no trans people, there are no non-binary people. Looks like you are intentionally saying that. So whatever language you're using, it looks like you are choosing sides in a culture war, right? So it comes down to awareness. And I think for people in your position who are managing like other people's brands, and ultimately you don't have the final say so, final control on what they're going to put out there or what they're going to post, but you can make them aware of like, when you say this will be the impression, this will be the impact. I understand that you don't agree that that should be how people take what you're saying, but that's how things are right now. And even having that level of awareness, I'm sure a lot of people managing brands don't have the ability to advise their clients on that. So you're ahead of the game, the fact that you even noticed.
I mean, the way that I noticed it, funny enough, actually, was through creating graphics. I was creating images for social media, and I kept noticing that when we were using like stock imagery sites to create these graphics and images, it was always a white blonde-haired woman who was like 30 years old or younger, and it was an effort in being more aligned with the ideal customer of our brand. And that triggered a bit of awareness that like, oh wait, not only are we only representing this like person that isn't actually our brand's ideal customer, but their ideal customer could look like a lot of different things in terms of their visual representation. I need to make sure that's reflected. And that was where my interest and where some of my reasoning for like needing to dive into this came from, was like, I'm not representing my clients to the way they need to be. So I wish I could say it was from my open heart awareness of the struggles of minority groups, but it was in an effort to be better at my job, and it just kind of, the two things collided in a really lovely way for me.
And they're going to keep colliding, and they're going to keep doing one and the same. I think the people who really like are just at the beginning of their journey with this stuff do see it, and you kind of referenced this earlier, like as this totally separate, like now I have to learn that, right? It's like getting a new, like when email came out and they're like, I don't want to learn that, right? Like I know someone who works for lawyers at a really old traditional style law firm. He has to fax everything to this one guy because he will not
email.
So that's happening.
Fax machines still exist?
Apparently, right? So there is that resistance, right? And they see it as this other thing that I have to learn, and you resist like integrating it. But it really, it's going to become unavoidable. The pain of not really moving along this journey is going to become much worse than the pain of experiencing it. And I think a huge misconception is that this is all about reaching out externally and learning about, consuming knowledge about external groups and groups we don't belong to. And I won't get into the kind of colonial roots behind why we, especially as white people, have that impulse and that urge. And we implicitly, by doing that, see ourselves as this neutral default that is outside of everything. I'm a researcher. I came from 7 years in research. I used to get in arguments with the heads of a research team about this, being like, I shouldn't be facilitating groups on being Black in corporate America. Like, not just because I'm not Black, but because I'm white. And that's a huge part of the experiences. I'm like the elephant, you know, and they couldn't comprehend. They're like, we're researchers, you know, it's not about it's about everyone. I'm like, oh my God, like I spent 3.5 hours trying to explain this and couldn't get through. And these are people whose living is in doing diversity.
About it.
So that's just to say for anyone listening, like, There's no one has a silver bullet here. Everybody is stumbling through. Everybody is
Yeah.
still learning. Anyone who tells you that they have it all figured out, right, is lying, right? Or they're not nearly as far along their journey as they think they are. Where I am, the further I go, the more I don't know, right? It's always a journey of humility, but it becomes a conscious competency of going inward, right? So that's what I mean about not reaching out. When I talk about race, what have I been acculturated to believe about myself as a white person, for instance? You know, it was maybe 5 years ago, I had already been in this work for a while, and I just happened to notice myself in a crowded subway platform going up the stairs to get out of the subway. And I got out of the way for this middle-aged white guy in a suit. And then almost immediately didn't get out of the way for a middle-aged black guy in a suit. And they looked so similar. They were the same height, same age,
Yeah,
similar.
yeah.
There's something that cognitively triggered it into my conscious awareness. And all of a sudden I became aware of something my body was doing that was totally unknown to me. Like the way I was moving, my body's moving through the world. I'm out here being like anti-racism, social justice, and my body's like, and I am more important than bodies that aren't white.
Yeah.
Period. Like that's just
That's so interesting.
body is doing, right? So that was a huge wake-up call for me that I was at. And again, this intellectualized idea of knowledge is very Western, colonial, consuming. There's other cultures and indigenous cultures who wouldn't say you know something just because you can parrot it, just because you can say it, right? It would be part of how you move through the world. But we have this totally intellectualized relationship to everything in our cultures. And that's why starting to get comfortable speaking in first drafts, just saying things, like some of the biggest learning moments I've had have been when I've been put in kind of a pressured situation, or I've stepped out of my comfort zone in a racial dialogue and I've just said something. And I've realized later, like, that came out of my mouth. And I had to go and really get honest with myself. And so most of the work is that. It's not going out and consuming knowledge about other groups. Most of it is really that.
Yeah, I think approach social change from a perspective of empathy and from unsympathy almost, actually. And it becomes almost verging on the line of being condescending rather than awareness of ourselves and the impact. And it's interesting, we were talking about race just then, and I find it hard to relate. I walk through the world as a white woman, so there are certain experiences that I'm never going to see in the same way. As much as I can hear it from my Black friends, from my Asian friends, like I will never truly understand. But when we talk about it in a gender relation, I can understand that more because I see that in the way that I walk around the world. So it's interesting because I can't empathize. I can try, but I can only look inwards. Understanding their circumstance, I don't feel like I can ever truly do. At least that's my take from a very uneducated approach. So I could be way off.
No, that is 100% true. Like that we will never, and this is why I love my idol is Alok Vadmanan, an incredible non-binary speaker. I don't know if you know them, but they say comprehension is not a prerequisite for compassion, right?
Yes.
Again, this is our intellectualized, knowledge consuming acculturation. Our operating system says, I don't have to care about something until I understand it. If I can understand it, it's not being presented to me in a way that I understand. Like I empathize, I deeply, viscerally, I get it. Right. That's why it's a red flag when you hear someone say, I'm an ally. I get it. It's like, oh, no, nowhere near getting it. Right. So that is at the root, right? That is my body moving through the subway and saying, I'm not getting out of your way. You're getting out of my way. It's deeply, deeply rooted. And so the condescension, right? And this is with people with disabilities, I think experience this more than anyone is like, oh my God, like, I don't know what I would do. Like the number of people with disabilities I've spoken to who have been told multiple times in their life, I would kill myself if I was in your position. I would kill myself if I had that disability multiple times, not like once. They're like throughout my life, I am hearing this.
Like you should feel so awful for having to move through the world the way you do.
Because they imagine themselves, like if me with all of my unhealed trauma and my condescension and all of my ego were suddenly confined to a wheelchair, I would quite literally end my life because I have so much ego tied up in it. But there's no realization that like people with disabilities have had a completely different life worldview. They have a level of expanded like critical thinking and mindset capacity that we can't comprehend, right? It's this idea of objectivity. It's just not real. That's one thing that has been hard for me to accept, but has come through loud and clear in all my years of doing this work is there is no objective perspective. And therefore there is someone who's right and someone who's wrong. There are simply two humans interacting, trying to reach through all the layers of their own acculturation and biases to try to find some common humanity. And unfortunately, a lot of the way this has manifested online has made that really, really hard, where it should have made it really easy. And some places it is easy, and in a lot of places it's really hard.
I think with online, I mean, again, I'm speaking about this just from my gut and what I can see, but I think a lot of the issues that I see with it is that the idea of the antagonistic way that people come at it, the cancel culture, the perspective that if people don't know and they say something that could be completely out of line, but they're doing that maliciously and they must be racist or they must be sexist by having made maybe a mistake. My perspective is I think a lot of people do just genuinely put their foot in their mouths. They don't realize that there's an issue. And that's where I want to spin back around to the small business perspective, because I think it is prominent, this conversation around cancel culture and like, what am I going to do if I'm putting myself in there, putting myself out there? How do I make sure that I don't get cancelled? I'm not asking you to fix that problem, but what advice would you have for people who are in this position of trying to be a personal brand and have this public facing persona, or supporting someone in that position, to not inadvertently offend and cause major strife for both minority groups and their business and the future of their business?
So two core things, and you already touched on just overriding theme a little bit with the paternalism, right? Anytime there's that condescension or savior or charity or look at me, I'm helping the little people who are disempowered. That's an energy you always want to like be on the lookout for. Anything that you're saying, like, do not put out that energy, right? But the two big things that I think you need to get in place to be able to do this and mitigate the risk of getting canceled as much as possible. First is getting very clear on your values as an organization, right? I was talking to someone who was I like a consulting owner, so I don't know if it's small business or not, but they said, I don't think, men should be in women's bathrooms, right? I'm like they felt very strongly about that. I'm just like, that's not a value, right? What's the value underneath that? Is it paternalism toward women? Is it a need for hierarchy and control? Like, you have a value there. Is it one that you really want to be broadcasting as part of your business?
Yeah.
Is it one you might even want to reconsider? Right? So figure out what your values are as a business. If your value is, I value all human life, right? How does that actually manifest? What does that look like? You can't say that's your value and then say, but women should die because they have a fetus that should have been aborted, right? Well, then you don't value all human life. So you really need to get clear on what your values are. And they usually are at a higher level than that. It might just be freedom to live authentically, just to give one example, right? So when you go out and talk about these things, you restate your values, say as a company or as a person that lives by the value that all people should have the freedom to live authentically. We strongly denounce, anti-trans bill 1338 that will dramatically negatively impact mental health of vulnerable youth as well. Talk about specific things, right? Because if you just come out and say, we stand with all marginalized groups seeking human rights, people are just going to use you as like a straw man for whatever like quote unquote woke thing that they don't like, right? And it's just virtue signaling and it's performative. So it's a lose-lose. Posting a rainbow flag for Pride Month, right? That's not going to, it's literally a lose-lose at this point because the LGBTQ community doesn't think it means anything. And then like, uses a straw man by this other community that is choosing to scapegoat the most marginalized in our world, right? So the first is getting clear on your values, coming back to and restating those values every time. When you get called out or when something happens in the media or when someone's like, why aren't you commenting on this, right? You say, these are our values, we stand by them, or you go back and look at your values and say, okay, according to our values, we're not going to say anything about this. Like, you need to have that core guiding compass because that will shape the community and your audience in a way that will mitigate who's even showing up on your social media. And it will also just make it like more consistent and less likely that you get called on something. But you have to, live your business that way too, with your employees, everything, because that's coming out, you're seeing what's happening with Lizzo right now, right?
Yes, where she's like the body positivity icon, and then it turns out that there's been a bunch of fat phobia inside of her own. I don't think she's named. I think it's one of her like team. I don't know the details, but it seems
bunch of different stuff. But this is a great example. You've heard about it, but you don't know what it really is. You don't know how Lizzo's really implicated, and we can get into this when we talk about what cancel culture is and like the problems with it and how we all need to get better at navigating it. Because there is so much misinformation, so much clickbait, right? But Lizzo is a great example of someone who has this brand, has this like intellectualized ability. She's done a great job responding to call outs and things in the past. Then in the seeming privacy of her own business, I think the stuff she's directly accused of is more sexual harassment related, trying to get people to do stuff with strippers, things like that. And so it's like, there is a power dynamic there that she has, and she has not interrogated her relationship with that power dynamic. All that other stuff can be true that she has done and that she has stood for, that she has empowered, and she still has these deeply internalized constructs and entitlements and the superiority inferiority complex that is leading her to behave in ways that seem, counter to that and are not true to her stated values. So if you're going to state your values, you need to change your behavior, interrogate your behavior, and seek feedback from your staff about your behavior and your policies and all of that will support those values. And this is also just an example of how you can't hide anymore. Someone from staff will come out and say, like, if something's going on, it'll
get out there eventually. One thing I wanted to add on that idea of people coming up with their values is I think firstly, people need to separate their business values and their personal values, because not always are those two things going to be alike. You can have a really strong personal stance on something, but that same stance isn't going to carry over to how you run your business. And I see, as somebody who supports with business coaching and with strategy input with businesses, that people mistake their values with their end goal. Like, people will talk about their values as how they want to see their business. So they'll be like, it's a great organization to work in, and it's this and it's that. But there are no values there. You're just telling me what you want to happen. So if you're listening, have a real think about this. This isn't just something to like throw down on a business plan and be like, yep, done. My values are there. Like, you need to interrogate actually, what does my business represent? Like, for example, something that I have in place as part of my values for my business is supporting to lower income. And it's a huge hiccup of mine. A thing that's always been a big impact is underpricing myself out of fear of overpricing. So to combat that and to make sure that it still stands true as a value of my business, when we hit a certain profit margin, we give away a free program to somebody who fits the bill of trying to grow a business, maybe in a marginalized community or not, but being somebody who is in a low income household and truly like cannot afford but still needs the help. And it's like, there are ways that you can implement your values into your business in really, like, that's a really small thing that's just like, oh yeah, well, once a year we'll do this as long as we hit this target. And it's like embedded. And I see it as well with people having charity goals in their business to relate to values that are input into themselves, but also into their brand. So yeah, I just wanted to jump in on this idea of values and where they go wrong a lot of the time.
Yeah. And then I'll get into the second part in a second, but it's so true also to look at, like, where is there discord between your individual values as a business owner and the values of your business, and why, right? Like, as an individual, I don't think anyone's real value is around like, I just hate people who aren't white. I don't think that's the real value, right? I think often there is trauma in their lifetime. There is inherited beliefs about these groups. There's just like this propaganda that we all had to, race was, for instance, constructed in the court system in the US. Like, it wasn't something that existed before, what was it, like the late 1600s, early 1700s. So it's like, this is not a real thing, but we have such a deep same with the gender binary, right? Well, maybe you were slapped by your dad for putting on a dress when you were 5 years old, and now you hate trans people, right? Like, so it's figuring out, like, what's really underlying these things. What do I want my business to stand for? I think a great example, I don't remember if we've talked about this, was like plastic surgery, right? If you run like a plastic surgery, you might get people coming and be like, this is bad for women, or feminist, right? But there's a difference between your marketing, which very well might be, and I've seen plenty of plastic surgery marketing that is very demeaning and degrading to women. But then it's like, there's going to be people who think plastic surgery in and of itself, right, is part of the problem. And you as a business, instead of just deleting those comments and blocking those people and constantly putting yourself in that position, instead you can say, we recognize, and if this is aligned with your values, right? We recognize that we live in a patriarchal society, that women are held to a very unfair beauty standard. And we personally find value in empowering women to defy the barriers presented by that beauty standard in order to find fulfillment in their own lives, seeing as patriarchy is not going anywhere in the next, here is not going to topple, right?
We need a few more Barbie movies before any progress.
Yeah. And more about, speaking of the Barbie movie, more about men and how men suffer under patriarchy, but that's a conversation for a different time. But you can still find, like, you don't have to just take those people at their word and say, oh, there they are, the feminist party line, right? I just have to keep combating this party line. Make your own party line for you and your business and your values, and stick with it and be authentic to it. And then you're not going to run into these issues as much. The second thing to always do when you're going to be, I mean, I would say speaking in general, because again, you don't know when something is going to happen or you get called out, is to speak from personal experience, right? Speak from your lived experience and start to notice the way your observations or the way you describe things actually are coming from a biased lens. Like there was a reality TV show person who on one of those like Netflix dating shows where like no one sees their Instagram until like they're famous on Netflix. And he was getting dragged for saying he was in some major US city and he had said, like he was out to something with friends and he was like, oh, it was so great seeing so-and-so at this like restaurant, even though we had to walk through like sketchy neighborhood name to get there. And all these people who are from that city, like I'm sure it had like 18 likes or something to start, but as all these people from that city are like, that neighborhood's literally not sketchy at all. It's just predominantly Black. Like it's not a dangerous neighborhood. It's not even like a poor neighborhood. Like it's literally just a Black neighborhood. And so he obviously wasn't, I mean, also probably didn't know that he was gonna
and
but yeah, like that's just one of those things that we think, oh, it is my experience. I walked through a sketchy neighborhood, so I feel like I can say that. It's like, but did you walk through a sketchy neighborhood? Like what actually happened and what are you trying to convey and why? And just really work on that practice of speaking from your lived experience. After you brought up when George Floyd was killed and companies are like, do I say something externally? Do I say something to my staff? What do I do? Think about the difference between saying like, things are really bad right now from a racism standpoint. And I just want to say that I'm an ally to the Black community and Black Lives Matter, right? Like the kind of default, like that's the variation of what you would hear from a lot of people versus someone saying something like, you know, as a white person, right? So just acknowledging that, again, speaking from my positionality, I haven't had to contend with fears of police violence. I haven't lost any loved ones at the hands of a racist police officer. I can't put myself in the shoes of mourning families and the collective rage and outpouring of grief from this community right now. And my personal disconnect from this violence is the problem. And I'm sitting with what it means to be white in a world where Black lives don't matter, right? That's what I'm sitting in right now. If you're actually sitting in that, you can say it. You will come up with the words to say, here's what I'm sitting with. But too many people are like, oh my God, I'm expected to say something. I have to look at good ones. I have to say something. Like if that's your motivation, you are going to fail. Like it's only gonna do really well.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Because I was at that point, I had just left my full-time job and was just diving into my first year of being this marketing agency owner and running accounts. And it was a really difficult conversation to have with clients because there were some people who messaged me morning of and was like, we have to say something, like, so this thing has happened, we have to acknowledge it. And there was the whole like black square trend on Instagram where you posted the blank post and those sorts of things. And it was like, what do we get involved with and what don't we? But there were also clients that I won't name that were like, this is stupid and this is nonsense. And when I said, hey, like, do you want to talk about this? That was the response we were hit with. And it's really difficult because as somebody who's on their profile and acting as them, I'm the person who gets the backlash. You deal with the anxiety and the stress of awful comments whenever they crop up of like, why haven't you spoken about this? You agree with this, don't you? And like the accusationary stance is really tough when your values personally don't align with the people that you're representing as well. And they were things that I was doing and saying that these clients had a completely differing view. So it was really tough to have to sit in the position of, I couldn't apologize and say, you're right, they're wrong. Like I have to stand with what this company's values and what their wants and needs and takes moving forward are. But it was bloody tough, I'll tell you that.
And that's why in a moment like that, you really need to know from your client, what are, like, I'm going to be on the front lines of this. So I need to know what your values are, because that's what I'm going to be reasserting over and over. Right. And it's not enough to just say, we don't comment on political things, because then you're going to get, why is my life political? Why is my right to exist political? Right. You need to have, and as someone like you who is as aware of this and is like, this is not how I would be handling it, that you have the ability and you have the awareness to put the pressure on them for like, this is what's going to happen. Here are the types of comments we're going to get. I need to know what I'm authorized to say. And here's what I would recommend, right? It might be that we don't think that talking about these things on social media or putting out a performative statement is worthwhile.
And don't get me wrong, some of my clients did have that. It was that casual of like, I don't think I should be the person to talk on this. And that's valid. But it's really hard when you have opposing views, especially like if someone just wants to stay away from the conversation because they aren't in the know and then they have the privilege to be able to be in that position. That's hard to argue with because that's their prerogative. But when somebody kind of pushes against your personal values or is showing hatred, as I was perceiving it, and the same in other situations for clients, but also for social media managers that I've coached since then. But it's like, how do you represent somebody who's so opposing? It's a really difficult conversation because in my book, it's, well, maybe they're not the right client for you to have at the end of the day. Yeah. And they misalign with your business's values. But there is that position and that does happen.
And at least you can draw the line of like, you know, the silence is deafening, right? Mm-hmm. In these moments. And if you let the silence speak for itself, right? Instead of having to come in and be like, oh, I'm pretending to hold these views that I don't have, like to set that boundary with clients, like when you are going to take a stance that is in opposition to human rights or social justice, then I will only respond with silence to the backlash that you receive.
Yeah, I'll leave you to answer these nasty comments. Thanks.
And also like going in and like having to delete all the comments too is a lot of work. And it just makes people more, I feel like that's always a bad plan, just delete a bunch of those comments because they just come back and they just like, oh, they deleted the comment because then they know you're seeing it. That like, that's a reaction to it. So better to just, if nothing else, like let the silence speak for itself. Like, yeah, clearly don't care. You clearly don't care about this because you haven't said anything. Nothing to add.
Nothing. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think that will take people who are in that social media management position, or even VAs, anyone who is managing an account on behalf of someone else. It takes some of the uncomfortability out of it. That if your client chooses to respond with something that you don't like and don't agree with, that's very different than you having to like really step outside of what you believe in to go with them. Okay, coming back around then to some actionable advice for people who are listening. Any kind of strategies that you would put in place that you would advise people for that they could adopt to really support a positive change on society while still being them and approaching the world from their perspective and not trying to kind of step outside of themselves and speak on other people's lived experiences?
Yeah, I think it starts with, what is that positive change you want to see in society? And I don't mean, here's what I want society to look like, right? Not to have the hubris of like, this is what we're working toward, but what are the inequities and the injustices that you see that you want to see change, right? And then it's a matter of aligning that to your values. So where does that align with my values? What are the things I can say that are in alignment with my values that support that change? And then most critically, what behaviors of mine and what language from me will actually impact that change? You brought up the Black Square Blackout Tuesday thing, right? This is a great example of what not to do, in that you got backlash for not doing it, and then you got backlash for doing it. People did it was because it was getting in the way. It was blocking out a lot of information about protests and information that people needed to get. It meant literally nothing. It takes, like, you could be the most racist person on earth and you can put a black square in your Instagram. So it doesn't like mean anything.
Yeah.
That's part of this signaling, this virtue signaling. Like if I get people to take one thing away who have no experience with this and feel like totally out of their depth, this concept of virtue signaling, which is exactly what the black square is, which is saying like, or putting up a rainbow flag or whatever, like it doesn't land the way you think it does. These marginalized communities. It might land.
Sorry, to jump in there, can you explain virtue signaling for people, just in case they're not familiar with the phrase?
So it's literally the things that are very visible, very public, but offer no evidence of any kind that you are an anti-racist person or that you support LGBTQ plus rights or anything, right? It's you're literally saying it feels like a big deal to the people who are doing it because they're so focused on the people they're antagonizing. They're so focused on the people they're alienating. They're like, oh my God, all the hateful transphobic people that follow me are gonna be really upset about this. But as long as that's the group that is front and center in your mind, you are not serving the other groups, and you will end up just like disappointing everybody because no one's going to come give you a cookie or a gold star for posting a black square. In fact, it was widely regarded as, you know, a performative thing that was being done. Talk about the thing that makes your like heart kind of race, but it's about you, right? Like I could tell that story about the subway and these two different guys. No one's going to come at me and be like, oh my God, right? Like they're like, oh,
I think I genuinely think that is the fear, though. I think people are afraid that they will say something like, hey, I have prejudices, and think that that's something that cancel culture is going to jump on them for, because there is this, especially on Twitter. I think that's the platform that is the bin fire of all bin fires, and it's hard. It can feel like no matter what I say, I'm not going to win here, and especially copping to having behaviors that maybe aren't okay and need addressing can feel like such a vulnerable place to put yourself.
And that's the fine line, right? Is between this like confessional stance versus I'm being vulnerable and showing you my learning process. Because when you show what you learned, right? Like when I told that story, I was like, suddenly I became aware of the entitlement of my white body moving through the world. I became aware of that. That's not something I'm coming up with. Oh, what can I say about this to make it sound like a story that doesn't make me look bad? I'm like, this is literally what happened. And so anyone else, and I've told that story to many people and many other stories. I have tons. I use them in all the trainings and stuff I do to make people understand like this is not, I'm not someone who has like never done these things. I'm someone who is doing the radical self-honesty to excavate these things and get better at it, right? But they've experienced that. Marginalized groups, Black people have experienced white bodies moving through space like that. So, but they don't know the internal process. So they're actually hearing something from me that might help them have better interactions with white people or be better at navigating white people. Who knows, right? I'm sharing what is unique to my lived experience and something that I learned, but there is a difference between this confessional of like, if a man were to go on Twitter, it's like, I raped a girl in college. It's just been weighing on me all this time. Oh my God, you know, it's horrible. I'm so scared of cancel culture. Like, yeah, that's not going to go well for you, right? But if you come in and say, like, I have spent so much time wrestling with myself about some of the situations that I've been in and the things I've done when I was younger that I actually now recognize were very coercive, and realizing, you know, why I thought I could take advantage of women like that, and that I really have been socialized to see them as an object. I'm not going to hide behind the fact that other men were behaving this way and it was normalized. Like that's no excuse for causing harm and literally objectifying another human being. And I feel so much remorse, and I don't think these women want to hear me, but like, I'm just sitting with the fact that I've spent so much of my life objectifying women, right? Like two totally different things. Like you are just trying to be like, I'm the victim because I feel distressed by my own racism or sexism. And the other, you're like, here's my learning journey. And that actually opens it up for other people to share what they've learned and to step in. And honestly, members of marginalized groups, like women, we give these men who say these things way too much credit. We jump over like, oh my God, why can't all men be like, the bar is
on the floor? Okay. I think we've covered so much, but I do have just one more question, because if the worst does happen, if you get put in a position where your brand or brand that you're representing gets hit with being cancelled, how should people approach this? I guess you've kind of touched upon having your values really clear. Is that the same stance that you think if you do get hit with being cancelled or saying something negative that you need to address, that's the same answer?
I think that's part of it. It's a bit longer. I have like an acronym for like,
oh, cool. Okay, we'll put it on the screen. People can learn. Great.
It takes time. It would be more of like a couple hour workshop to really work through like what this, like, practice it. But I can give you like the broad strokes of what it looks like. So it's BICS, BICS. I didn't choose that word. That's just what it came out to. And it starts with breathe, right? Pretty self-explanatory. Get into a fight or flight. We hold our breath. We get elevated. We feel under attack. All of our thoughts start going into attack mode. So first thing is to breathe. That regulate your nervous system. Next is to interrogate. And there's several steps here. You want to interrogate the impact that whatever you did or said appears to have had, right? What is being reflected back to you in this backlash that tells you what that impact was? how might you have harmed this community? And I want to make a side note here. I was just talking to someone who's blind, has several disabilities, and he was lamenting how hard it is as a member of a marginalized group when someone has done something bad to show up with like the tone and the whatever, like the, just so you know, that really makes me look like I'm not a human. Like, generally, when you get this backlash, it can feel so vitriolic and so chaotic because there is a visceral kind of reaction happening. Sometimes on their soapbox trying to be a social justice warrior and get a bunch of retweets, but other times it really is like members of the group are literally just like through their own hurt trying to tell you something has happened to me. So really home in on the impact. What did this do to this group? Not the words that they're saying, right? We tend to go in and pick apart, oh, well, this isn't true about me. Right. And here they're misrepresenting what I said because I didn't say that. It's not about that. It's about the impression that you made. They're reacting to that impression. So interrogate that impact, then interrogate your intent. Now, we tend to think, I know what my intent was, but often we didn't. And this goes back to what you said earlier about the paternalism and the condescension. Often we do not realize that if we're being truly honest with ourselves, our intent was to be paternalistic, right? And to show our pity, right? Like that was there. So that part's really hard. But you have to interrogate, what was your real intent? Why did you post a black square? Why did you actually do it? It's not because you think Black Lives Matter. What is the real reason? That's part of it, but what is the real whole reason behind your intent? And then you can see where there might be actually a relationship between the intent and the impact. Then you interrogate the implications, right? What are the implications of this learning? Right? Have I learned something from this? Are there implications for my behavior to change? Are there implications for me to apologize? Right? When I apologize, does it look like admitting to having made a mistake that I should have known better than to make? Or does it look like now that I've learned, I won't make this mistake again? Right? Because again, we tend to think apologies or saying I made a mistake means I should have known better. No, sometimes you just made a mistake. And sometimes you only now have learned what you need to learn to not make mistakes like that in the future, right? So what are the implications? And then from there, it's constructing, right? You have to do all that reflection, all of that interrogation before you can construct what your response is going to be. And first, you have to reflect back what you heard, say literally copy exactly what the broader community is saying. I've heard that I had this impact, right? This is how it was received. Like, make sure that people can see that you understand, and maybe you don't understand. And there might be more follow-up from there, and we'll get to that. But you're going to reflect back what you've heard. Then you provide additional context, right? A lot of times with backlash and cancel culture, the context is stripped away. The nuance is stripped away. A lot of the headlines I've seen about Lizzo already, I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, I've seen some ridiculous clickbait headlines about it. So you have every right to bring in the context, not as an excuse, right? Not even
the fine line in this scenario.
Not even as an explanation, right? Just the full context, and you're just giving information, and then you provide clarification, right? Here's what if necessary, here's what I should have said. Here's what I meant to say. Here's what I intended to say. If your intent turns out to be pure, here's what I intended to convey. And I understand that instead I caused this harm, but here is my intended message. And then restate your values. Those are your commitments, right? Whether it's, staying true to this value, or I remain committed to being a growing ally to this community, or I remain committed to learning and to excavating my own whiteness and the things that I'm doing wrong with that. And then, so that's the whole constructing the response piece. And then in terms of actually sending the response, there has to be speed. Right. So if this is a big thing that is going to take you a while to figure out, and I don't want to jump the gun on this, you should still respond immediately saying, I'm aware of this and I want to give it the time to reflect and learn that it deserves. Just say something up front so it doesn't keep proliferating. We've seen that show Beef on Netflix that had backlash about David Cho. It was a great example where they took so long to respond. The delay of the response became as big of an issue as the original thing. So that happens a lot. People have nothing better to do than just keep, and then they'll talk about what you're doing instead of responding. If you have a scheduled post that goes out, and you haven't said anything.
As a social media person, can I just add, there needs to be an extra S on the end of the scheduling needs to be just cancelled out. Do not be posting anything else in the midst of all of that going on.
Yeah, you're right. For a big blow, I feel like this applies to both call outs that are maybe coming from one or two people versus the full blown backlash, but you're totally right. Yeah. For brands, get rid of the scheduling. All the things that are send are S. So great. We'll throw scheduling in there.
And
the simplicity, right? You want it to be not this like diatribe. You don't want to like an essay. You're covering the core bases that we just went over. It should be simple. It should be easy to answer, and it should stand on its own, right? If people have more
Yeah,
things
I love
to
that.
say, unless it's something where you're literally saying, like, you make a suggestion, that's another piece of this, is like, if you have more feedback for me, send it here. If anyone wants to share more context or how I impacted them with this, please share it this way. But you can make those suggestions. But you want this statement, this response, this video, whatever format it is, to stand on its own as the thing that people will keep referring back to. Because that's what they'll do. When they have more issues or they're angry again, they're going to keep referring back to the last thing you said in the last video. So you really want it to be simple, clear, stand on its own. And finally, it has to be sincere, right? It has to come from that authentic reflection. It can't just be this rote formula. You know, I can't write a formula. I can write something that sounds pretty good, but it's still not going to come across as sincere. So
I
this is
think that's a really good point, because I think a lot of the quote unquote bad apologies in this situation that I've seen are because you can see the lack of sincerity. It's funny, I talk a lot about how energy and everything that you're putting into social media gets picked up, whether you realize it or not. There's this like unconscious, whether it's your tone of voice or whether it's something else, there's this unknown factor of energy in how you present yourself online. And if the energy is insincere, whether that's in you posting about like promoting your business and you don't really believe that it's worth what it's worth, or if it comes to as critical a scenario as this, where you're dealing with a really upset group of people that you're trying to placate, if it's not sincere, it just immediately falls flat. Even if you've hit the nail on the head in saying everything right, it will never come across the right way.
Exactly. I think the most common way that insincerity happens is when someone's like, I apologize for whoever I offended. Or like, right? Like, you're just
if my
literally
actions hurt anyone. Oh,
right. Exactly. I apologize if my actions hurt anyone. You're like just trying to target this amorphous group that you don't care about, who has issues that you don't understand, who's just really annoying you. Now, at the same time, I want to acknowledge that, like, I've spoken to influencers who have gotten like doxxed as a result of backlash that really, for things that really come from that place of innocent ignorance, right? And there's a tendency then to really become the victim and be like, I'm so angry at all these people that have led to like me now getting death threats, right? To then make that whole group one group and not disaggregate, you know, the doxers, because there's people out here on the internet. This is why the internet has gotten so wild these days. Like, there's people out here who just look for backlash happening just so they have an excuse to dox someone. Just they have an excuse to go hack their computer, find their information, put it online. Like, they get some sick satisfaction out of it, right? These are not people who are good people doing good things, right? They're just jumping on this bandwagon, like so much other clickbait and these stupid like websites that have these misleading headlines. And so this is where the responsibility, personal responsibility for all of us comes in, is like, go do your own work. If you're so scared of cancel culture, you probably are not, you're probably part of the problem, because you're probably one of these people who is taking these headlines at first glance, at face value. You're not doing your research. You're not applying critical thinking skills. So you are as much a part of the problem of cancel culture as anything else. And the reality is, like, the facts dictate what happens to someone's career, though, right?
I hear people being scared about cancel culture a lot, and I hear this being a rhetoric, but I think more hypothetically than people actually walking through life terrified that this is going to happen to them. Because I put myself out on the internet every day and have done since like 2018, and I don't think it's crossed my mind much, apart from when something big happens, like what happened with George Floyd, like the Me Too movement, and like when there's International Women's Day, where you sit down and you get reflective about like, okay, how do I want to approach this, and what's going to be the right way to approach it. Aside from that, I don't think it's a passing thought. So that has just stuck with me, that maybe if this is a fear of yours, you've just got some more work to do on yourself.
If you're so quick to kick people to the curb, or you have this zero tolerance, like purity mindset about other people, like, you're part of the problem. You're contributing to, just like that energy you were talking about that goes into your voice on social media, you're contributing to that collective energy that says, oh, you can't make a mistake or you're done. You know, if that's how you're treating people and that's how you're talking about people, right? If you're showing up online and especially if you're someone who like is taking people down all the time online, or has opinions about other people, not that a lot of small businesses are doing that, but like, then you're just putting yourself up to be a hypocrite. People are going to apply that same thing to you. But if you come in with kindness and understanding and nuance, and always coming back to the facts of the situation, and sometimes we don't have the facts, right? Sometimes we just have the choice between, are we going to side with the more marginalized, more disempowered person in this dynamic are not, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah. I will say though, you said not many small businesses are probably going out on social media and kind of like getting in the sticks. That's a big thing that I see a lot, and more than you would expect, that when people have any kind of like personal brand, especially, a lot of people don't make new accounts to represent this new like business personal brand. It's old platforms that they've had since they were teenagers that now they're repurposing, and they've either got really problematic past things from when they were young and hadn't lived life and hadn't learned what was right and what was wrong, or they are using that account as for shit posting, let's say. Like, they are using it to go in there and just jump in on any conversation, and if they've had a bad day, they'll take it out on someone else on the platform without considering this is a representation of my business just as much as like the branded company name account is. If it says, like, for example, Bethan from Red, like, a lot of people will have their name and their company name together but still use that just as per normal. And not even just with social change and being a good ally and that side, like crazy pictures from nights out and other things going out on there as well. So it happens more than you probably realize.
oh my gosh. Well, that's all we can do as people who serve these accounts and serve these businesses, is help them be aware, right?
Yeah.
Say, I'm giving you all the information. Here's how it's going to land. Here's the impact it's going to have. Here's what I predict, do you want to have that? How are we going to handle the fallout from that? I think the other thing to recognize too, for people who have sincerely held kind of inclusive ideals and they want to do the right thing and they want to be on the right side of history, like maybe that's their value, being on the right side of history, and they're so afraid of getting something wrong, is if you make a mistake or you get called out, like the way you respond to it, how you handle it, can actually boost your brand even more if you hadn't made that mistake in the first place. Like, the response is everything. The ability to reflect back to all those things that I went over, like, that is what is an opportunity. And we're in an attention economy. You should want the attention. Like, you one time you're getting all this attention on you, you're like, get it away from me, I'm invisible. Like, no, use it. This is where the business side and the values side and the social justice side all converge, is like, you can take this moment and make your brand come out the other side better than it was before you.
Yeah, I will say I've seen that on TikTok, where a post has come up on one as I'm kind of scrolling through, of a company apologizing. This example was for their sizing. They had really restricted sizing, and it was a really, really good take. It was a really interesting video. They basically were saying, like, it was a budget issue, and with manufacturing needing to pay more for more sizes, it just wasn't feasible for them yet. But they gave a timeline of exactly when they were expecting to launch it. They gave competitors with wider size ranges as alternatives for people who couldn't, and were like, we know this might not be a good idea for us, but I'm sorry and you're right, and if you want something that's similar to what we do, these guys are really good, and they're a bigger company, so they have more. They earned a follow off of me very quick from kind of scrolling through. I hadn't seen the backlash. I saw the apology video and was like, nice, like, well handled, I'm in.
Exactly. That's what it's all about. And that's what it means to get out of that adversarial competitive mindset, right? If you're in that adversarial competitive place, you would never even dream of sharing your competitors with your customers. And we know these companies have done a ton of research. They know exactly who their competitors are. They know it much better than their customers do. So they have that information. If you have an implicitly adversarial operating system that you're still using, then you're never even going to think of that, right? So that's a great example of where, as a collective consciousness, right, where we're headed in the future, is we have to transcend this entire operating system. Whether you're shouting at people from the left or shouting at people from the right, like, you're still running different programs on the same operating system. And that is what I'm so interested in, like, people just coming out of this, instead of thinking, oh, how do I say the right thing or the wrong thing? It's not about right or wrong. It's not about these binaries. It's about, how do I show up authentically and consistently in my business practices, in how I run my company. For the most part, some people are being jerks and others are really trying to help you understand. And like, if you have this adversarial mindset, they all look the same, right? It's the same reason on the left, so to speak, or on the social justice side, you see an ignorant man or a malicious man, they look the same, right? A teenager saying something like, women only like buff guys, or whatever. That's coming from a place of like listening to Andrew Tate or like being ignorant. if you see
Well,
that
and from the patriarchy projecting that upon, it's not women that are telling him that he's too young to know the difference. Yeah.
understand, right? Him saying that versus like an incel men's rights activist saying that, like, and then women are treating them like they're the same. I'm like, and then you're
Yeah.
driving into the hands of Andrew Tate. So when you are using this operating system, you are perpetuating all of these problems. It doesn't matter which side of it you're on. You are perpetuating the same issues. Like, we still have this idea of like, if I'm going to get up on the soapbox and shout something, it has to be this like impenetrable, perfectly crafted, decisive, very masculine, right? It's a very masculine, domineering kind of energy. Like, just because that's the voice you see dominating on social media doesn't mean that has to be your voice. So find your voice as a business. And there are plenty of people to follow. Like, I love Alok Vadmanan, who I mentioned earlier. They will often screenshot hate comments in their comments and then post them and post their response to the comment, because it'll be someone saying something really horrible and transphobic, and Alok will respond saying like, I'm so sorry for whatever happened to you that made you feel this way about yourself, that you can't exist in the world as who you are. I love you exactly the way that you are and you're meant to be. I hope for you that you get to just exist that way and heal what's happened to you and find peace. And it's not in this paternalistic way. It's not in this condescending way. It's really like, I see how much you're suffering because of what you have said in this comment. And it's like, right? Like, oh my God. Like,
that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So follow people like that and see how they a totally different voice on the internet, what it looks like to find your own voice and actually be like, hey, wait a second. Yeah, I want to sound like that. That's how I impact change in the world. And that's how I show up as a force for good.
That's a really good point, actually, as well, to surround yourself with people you want to sound like, because there's this concept that we are made up of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. And I would love to see how that applies to today's day and age, where we probably spend more time with the people that we follow than our friends, than our family in a lot of instances. So are you making yourself up out of these 5 people, so to speak, that you're following that are posting toxic stuff, even if you're just following it for the news of it, for keeping in the loop? Like, it might be worth having a bit of a cull and a relook at who's the energy that you want represented on your feed when you scroll as well.
Yeah, for sure. Even people who are speaking like about like political stuff. Like, I see the vitriolic, I don't have like the Fox News type people in my family, but I have CNBC, CNN people. And I'm like, it's this, a lot of times it's the same, like the hatred toward Trump supporters and toward people who would vote for him, and like, oh, they're so stupid and they'll fall for anything, and they're trying to take ivermectin for COVID, they're going to inject themselves with bleach and blah blah. I'm like, you are very much embodying that superiority inferiority complex,
and that isn't winning anybody to your side.
No, it's not going to win them to your side, because the whole reason that they're falling for a strong man in the first place is because they have those issues with insecurity and self-esteem, and they're scared and confused by the world. So you coming in and condescending to them just makes it worse. I think that's the other thing that we don't, when we come in and we're like, it's an adversarial, it's a debate. It's I'm going to outsmart you. I'm going to outwoke you. I'm going to out whatever you, right? We don't realize we are often contributing to the very foundational reasons that that person has that hateful viewpoint in the first place. And one was saying, yeah, like my uncle, like my husband's side, like said this horrible thing at Thanksgiving. And it wasn't until later that I thought of like this really amazing like speech. Like, I wish I just sat there and gave it to him all the right things to say and blah, blah. And I was like, it was like with a group of people, so it wasn't one-on-one, but I was like, and what would that have accomplished? You imagine you would have given him that speech and he would have been like, you know what? Because you just delivered such an eloquent, articulate, intelligent sounding speech, I've completely changed my mind. No, you've made him feel stupid. You've made him feel domineered and dominated, embarrassed in front of other people, right? All of those same feelings are why he feels the need to hate trans people, hate Black people, hate in the first place.
Okay, this is completely off subject to the podcast now, but I have to ask this then, because I've been in that situation. I think most women have, where you've been at dinner with family and granddad said something dodgy and you're like, what the hell? Or you've been in a workplace and someone has said, I literally have had someone in work with me say women have more rights than men these days, and it was like the burning anger just immediately appears, and it's really hard to not immediately come at it from like, well, no, this isn't the truth. And the same with those comments that we were talking about earlier. You come at it with hurt, you come at it with anger. How do you have that conversation where you don't just make them hate the group even more?
Right. So the whole responding and like arguing with them, right? That's the old operating system, right?
Yeah.
So the number
Software
one,
update. What are we going to do?
right, we're talking a whole new, a whole new software, a whole new computer, whatever.
Yeah.
The key piece is questions. So you're going to ask questions instead of making statements and declarations, right? So when someone says, and it's going to be different depending on the context. I mean, if you are a member of the marginalized group that's being targeted, right? Or if like, say you're in a wheelchair and someone says to you, like, why are you in a wheelchair? You can just ask them why. Like, this is one powerful one. Just like, why? Like, why'd you ask me that? Like, oh, I'm just curious. Why? Right? Like, just
Why?
why?
Like
with everyone.
make them go to that space of answering like very childlike simplicity. Like, you know, when you're a kid and you're just like, why? And they end up having to break it down to like the key of the matter. And it's like, oh, okay, I've got
Why
to
are you curious? Why do you feel entitled to this information? Why do you, like, you're putting it on them with these questions, any question you ask, you're putting it on them to interrogate literally where what they're doing is coming from. So why is the easiest one. If why doesn't make sense, right? Or something like, I mean, even something that your like racist uncle says at dinner or whatever, say, why did you say that? It's like, oh, well, because, you know, these people are just taking over our country. And why does that scare you? What are you so afraid of? That's a better question. What are you so afraid of works for a lot of things. What are you so afraid of? Right? Like, just keep asking questions that are powerful, kind of open-ended questions. Go back to why when you need to. And eventually you will see, like, they'll come up like, well, because they talk about transitions. Well, because men are supposed to be like this and women are supposed to be like that. Why?
Yeah.
Well, because when I was a kid and I was growing up, you know, we had to do this and that. Why? Well, because back then, you know, we had very specific gender roles, and that's just how it was. Like, and that's how it should be. Why? Right? Like,
I love this.
Yeah.
So as a business coach, this is a journaling technique that we use with people who have mindset blocks. So it's a really common thing. Like, every coach I've ever worked with, I do it with my clients. It's like, if you have this belief, like maybe it's about people's money mindset. They're like, I can't charge more for that. Why? And you keep going and keep going. So I love that, because like I've seen how that works to get people like really enlightened and get some clarity on their view and where it comes from. So yeah, I can imagine it working in a very different way, but working just the same.
Like, they're having to go into an internal exploration. Whereas when you start arguing, it becomes a competition, and you're just trying, you're not going to cede any ground. You know, it's all about who wins. So they're entirely projecting outwards. They're not doing anything internal, but these are internal issues. These are internal wounds, right? So with that conversation about, you know, when I was a kid and this is how men and this, and if you're a boy and you act like that, then this happens to you. Why? Right? Did that happen to you? Right? So you're really listening. And if you don't know what question to ask right away, you start with just reflecting back what they're saying. Is like, I'm hearing a lot of fear around punishment for not strictly adhering to gender norms. I'm hearing you have a lot of fear around that. Where does that come from? Right? It's like coaching questions. Right? You just literally coaching, like, just get into it and remain, like, there's a term I learned recently called holding the charge, which is like, I've only recently heard this and started to try to, like, I'm recognizing it in interactions, right? When someone's getting so unsettled and so, like, you're actually starting to crack something open, this energetic kind of like charge, like, fills the room. You just want to get out of it. You're like, oh, get me out. Or your voice will start raising or whatever. Like, you kind of take on that energy. So you also have to build this capacity for holding the charge of the conversation. You're staying steady. You're not picking up the pace of your speaking. You're not slowing it down. You're not getting louder. You're not getting quieter. Right? It's less about focusing on that and more just noticing if you're able to do that, then you're doing a good job of holding the charge. You're holding up a mirror. You're just holding up a mirror.
I love that.
Then look into it. This is how we change our world. If that's what we really care about, is changing our world, and not about being the wokest person in the room, or, you know, looking being smarter. Being right, looking smarter. Having all the best words and vocabulary, whatever. If we really care about changing the world, like, this is what it looks like, is being that for as many people as possible.
I think that is the perfect place to end it, because we've just solved the world, or hopefully are helping people get to a point where we can start to make some of those changes. So it feels like a really good bow to what has been a really fabulous conversation. So where can people find you? Where is the best place to look you up?
So I post more on LinkedIn, so definitely follow me there. Although I'm just launching, because I know the social media community is more on Instagram. So you can go to @calloutcoach on Instagram. You will see I have just just started this account. So bear with me as I start bringing more content to it. But then also find me at isisfabian.com. And right now I'm doing free intro calls for anyone to book one, to just talk through the stuff, because I love having these conversations with people. I love hearing the questions they feel like they can't ask anywhere else.
Yeah.
Or you think that we can like work together somehow or partner or not, you just want to have a free like intro call, you can right now book that at my website, and also subscribe to my mailing list, because I'll be putting out self-guided, courses and things like that over time. Brilliant. To really serve people who are in the social media space. And so I want to make sure anyone listening to this who's interested in that knows when that's happening. And the best way to do that is to subscribe on my website.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This has been fabulous. And we're going to make sure that all of those details are in the description box below as well, so they're quick and easy to find.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Beth. And it was great to see you. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. Bye.